Good afternoon and welcome to everyone from across Canada. We've got people in Ontario and so forth to the 49th talk hosted by the Northwest Ceramics Foundation Speaker Series, the 49th talk since 2008. And we have over 180 registrants today. So first, a bit of housekeeping. Please remember to turn off your video and please mute yourselves during Robin's presentation. You can use the chat room to ask questions, and at the end, there'll be an opportunity to ask Robin questions directly. If you're not yet on our mailing list and would like to receive periodic emails about upcoming events, please go to our website, www.nwcf.ca, and click on the blue button that is on the top of every page, and this will take you to a form where you can request to be on our mailing list. Please do that. The Northwest Ceramics Foundation acknowledges that the land on which we work is the unceded, shared, traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. Additionally, we support the following statement. The Northwest Ceramics Foundation stands in solidarity with all communities marginalized due to race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or age, and commits itself to opposing racism in all its form. And at this time, our thoughts, of course, are with the peoples of Ukraine. Acknowledging, respecting, and celebrating difference, we commit ourselves and our organization to ensuring that our programming is inclusive and reflects the diversity of our community. So today, we are very pleased to introduce our speaker, Robin DuPont, who is well known in the ceramics community for his ceramic production, his teaching, and his expertise in atmospheric firings and kiln building. Robin DuPont received his BFA from the Alberta College of Art and Design in Calgary and his MFA from the Utah State University in Logan, Utah. He also studied at the Kootenay School of Arts in Nelson and the Australian National University in Canberra, Australia. He has been a visiting artist and instructor at numerous institutions, has participated in several artist residencies, and has built a variety of wood-fired kilns in Canada. In 2013, Robin was nominated for the Royal Bank of Canada Emerging Artist Award. And in 2021, he received the Northwest Ceramics Foundation Mayor Wosk Award of Excellence. Robin lives in the Slocan Valley in the interior of BC, where he makes utilitarian wood and atmospheric fired pots. They are exhibited across Canada and the United States. Recent exhibitions include Throne at the Touchstone Museum of Art and History in Nelson, BC, and a solo exhibition of this place at the Langham in Kaslo, BC. Both were in 2021. In Robin's talk, Wood Firing in Canada, he will share his insights into how the genre of wood firing plays a role in contemporary ceramics in Canada, discussing the makers, the kilns, and influences that are contributing to innovating a process that is thousands of years old. So, welcome, Robin. And
thank you so much. So I'd like to begin with the land acknowledgement myself, that I'm presenting from the unceded territory of the Sinixt and the Ktunaxa peoples. Thank you, Amy, and everyone at the Northwest Ceramic Foundation for inviting me to speak today. And for those of you listening in on the talk, thanks for being here. It's amazing to see all these familiar faces from far and wide. Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to jump right into it because I have a lot I want to share with you guys. So I'm going to share my screen here, and in true, the photos are not on the
glitches are required in this sort of thing.
Sorry, folks. We did a run through on this, and for some reason, yeah. It's just because I said I'm in a rush to jam as much into my 45 minutes as I could. Okay, back to square one here. Okay, so to set the stage, I'm going to talk about my own experiences as a wood firer in Canada, as well as cover some of the many people, institutions, and organizations that have and are influencing wood firing in Canada in the last 50 years. In my travels as an educator, I'm often asked about wood firing in Canada. Students are often asking me where they can study atmospheric processes. Over the course of the last couple of months, I've reached out to many people across the country, as well as put the call out to wood firers to submit images to begin an inventory of Canadian wood fires. I want to thank everyone who sent emails and photos and had conversations with me. I'll be honest in that this talk is not an entirely comprehensive of everyone wood firing in Canada at this time. And I will continue to work on the inventory. So if you haven't had a chance to submit images, please do. You can still do that. So I'll begin by giving a context as to where I come from my relationship to wood firing. Here's the person, or a coffee pour over made by the person rather, that introduced me to wood firing, Tom Rohr. Here he is after a firing off of Martin Tagseth's first Onagama, enjoying a cold one. So I came to art school as a young punk, thinking I would be a painter or a sculptor. It was versatility of clay that appealed to me at first. The fact you could simply or seemingly do anything with this medium. Make a pot, make a figure, a toilet, a piece of architecture if you wanted to. But it was wood firing that sealed the deal for me when at the end of that first semester, I had to pick a major. I left school and ended up working for wood firers in Canada, the US, and Australia. Over these apprenticeship years, there was over 100 firings in 20 different kilns. This was often a difficult time for me living out of my vehicle, but really important in my education and my journey. So I came back to finish my undergrad and moved out to the Kootenays where I live now and built this first kiln. We call her Lily. This kiln was built out of salvage material from a potter an hour north of me in Hills, BC, named Stephen Cook. Some of you might know Stephen. I believe last I heard from Steve, he was out on Vancouver Island, I think, firing with Gord Hutchins. Yeah, this absolutely destroyed my little two-wheel drive Toyota pickup hauling all this brick, as you can imagine. So I fired this for it was about 5 years. Then I took off to do my grad degree at Utah State, where I met up with another Canadian wood firer, Tony Clennell. When I was traveling Australia, I spent a couple days with Owen Rye, someone and I'm sure most of the international wood fire community respect. I was 24 and he told me that there was only one place a wood fire should do an MFA, Utah State. Being a bit of a contrarian, I naturally tried to argue, but it was futile. Utah State has facilities that are unrivaled for someone who wants to wood fire. This is their kiln yard. I think there's 5 wood kilns out there and a salt and a soda kiln. Utah also has 2 full-time faculty that both wood fire and are known and respected worldwide for it. So Utah has seen many Canadians through their graduate program. And so I'm just going to talk about or show a few images of the pieces of some of the recent grads. This is some wood fire cups from a fellow named Chris Watt, originally from the West Coast. And now he's a long-term resident at Red Lodge Clay Center. Here's a close-up of a jar Chris Watt made. This is Adam Lefebvre. Adam is now in Wisconsin. We're still actively trying to coax Adam back to Canada, though. Adam, hopefully you're listening out there. Get your butt back to Canada. Katie Dryber. Katie Dryber isn't really known for her wood fire work, but we coax her over to the dark side from time to time. Beautiful wood fired mug from Katie. Ayla Murray. Ayla Murray is from Brandon, Manitoba. I taught Ayla when I was at the U of M, and she just recently graduated from Utah State and was hired on there as one of their instructors. These last two images were Ayla's and are part of a series called Relics. This is Dan Murphy, this was one of the faculty. Dan was one of my advisors when I was at Utah. It's a wood-fired flask, hand-built, reduction cooled. There's Dan himself. John Neely, my other advisor when I was at grad school. John makes a beautiful teapot. Us grads would joke around that his teapots were more like engineered tea dispensing machines. I think it was Ernie Gentry that coined that phrase. So when I finished my MFA and came back to Canada, I did a bit of a teaching tour, teaching during the school year and coming back home to build kilns. The first wood kiln was in Anagama, affectionately known as Lucinda. Martin Tagseth and I, with a small crew, built this and fired it within 15 days. Truth be told, this is actually my favorite kiln, but maybe don't tell the other kilns. A couple shots of Lucinda here. Oh, there's Lucinda with Lola. There's Lucinda getting loaded up and fired. I am going to go through these images really quickly, but I think the Northwest Ceramics Foundation is going to put this talk up on YouTube. So you can always revisit the images at a later time. So the second wood kiln after grad school was a variation on the train kiln. We named her Yorl. In the middle there is the best firing partner I've ever had. Many of you know Eden, know that she's not a maker. She's a writer, but knows her way around a wood kiln. Our property is exactly halfway between Calgary and Vancouver, about half an hour north of the US border. And we have 3 wood kilns here now, but in a 15-minute radius, there are 3 others. So we've got Cam Stewart. Cam's a good friend of mine, a grad of Emily Carr, somewhere around 2004. And he fires, this is a double Bury, fires with wood and soda. Here she is, lit up. Some beautiful pots coming out of this kiln. This is a kiln that Cam actually built for a fellow potter here in the valley that some of you on the West Coast might know, Pamela Negley Stevenson, sorry. And this, double chamber climbing kiln fired, if I remember correctly, it was about 40 hours. Pam was a teacher of mine when I was at KSA and facilitated many wood fire opportunities for myself. And then the other kiln here in the valley is about 15 minutes down or south in the valley, a woman named Kim Chernoff. And unfortunately, I don't have images of her kiln, but it's a little cat kiln, fires off in about 20 hours. So now that you know a little more about my backstory, I'm going to switch gears a bit and go across the country giving a bit of a kiln tour and touching on some of the major educators and influencers. I really tried to shape this part of the talk around the people and institutions that had the most ripples throughout this genre of ceramics. So starting on the West Coast, Vancouver Island, we've got in Nanaimo on the east coast of Vancouver Island, we've got the Touchstones Society, which is the current kiln yard, I believe, is at Malaspina College. It's a nonprofit foundation, totally run by volunteers. I believe the history goes back to around early 90s when Les Beardsley was in Flagstaff, Arizona. For those woodfires listening that haven't been to Flagstaff, Arizona, I believe it's the University of Northern Arizona that's there. And if you haven't been there, it's basically Disneyland for woodfires. On about 2 acres, they have something like 30 different wood kilns, every different wood kiln you can imagine. And Les was down there and saw the Tozan Onagama and climbing kiln that was there. Came back to Canada and thought, why can't we have one of those? So from my understanding, he spearheaded it. Obviously, there was probably a whole slew of other people that chipped in on that and helped out. And they brought a fellow from Japan named Yukio Yamamoto, and Yukio built these kilns with a number of people in 95, I think it was. Jesse Birch is now the director of the society. Thank you, Jesse, for the images and all the information. His predecessor, Sandra Harkwell. So this sounds like an extremely accessible community of woodfires in a beautiful place in the country. It's had a tumultuous ride, but it seems like it's in good hands now. I think over the years, these kilns have played a huge role in exposing people to wood firing in our country. I know of a long list of people myself that have participated in these firings, and maybe one day I will get to. Here, I believe that first image was from the first construction. I just marvel at like the fact that they dismantled these kilns and rebuilt them. It was crazy. I should also mention, seen in this image, the Onagama, originally it was a climbing kiln and an Onagama that was built, and it doesn't seem like the Onagama got rebuilt, but in place of it, it seems like they built a train kiln. So you can kind of see the chimney end of that right here, obviously being fired. And then moving along here, just a stone's throw away up the Gulf Islands is Gordon Hutchins on Denman Island. In my research, many people, when I asked them, who do you think of when you think of Canadian woodfires, a lot of people brought up Gordon's name. Gordon's been potting for close to 50 years. He built the Tozan Onagama. So I should mention, yeah, a Tozan Onagama. Also built under the guidance of Yukio Yamamoto in 1996. Last I talked to Gordon, he was doing 2 firings a year, 1 student firing and 1 community firing with a number of professionals. Pictured here are a couple of those professionals. Kathy Jefferson, also from Vancouver Island, a very well-known potter here on the West Coast. And Vincent Massey, kind of see the back of his head there. The student firings are with his students from North Island College, but as well with the students from Emily Carr on the mainland there. Next, we have Wayne Nang, a celebrated Canadian ceramic artist from Hornby Island, who fired with wood for a significant percentage of his career. Although the kiln was no longer in operation by the time I came to ceramics, the stories were still prevalent in the community. So this is some images. Thank you, Guy Lan and Lindsay, for these images. His kiln was built In basically, the Song Dynasty kilns were the inspiration for his kiln. So you can kind of see some of that correlation there. Some beautiful tortoise shell cracking on the kiln opening up during the firing. Here's some pots that were coming out of the kiln. And Glen Lewis, Vancouver. So over a jump across the Wandafuka now, onto the mainland. Glen is a multimedia artist who has an extremely broad repertoire. Having worked with Bernard Leach, but also having been a part of being a part of the avant-garde art scene out on the West Coast. It's a nice bowl of Glen's. Okay, the Shadbolt Center is a community arts center in Burnaby, just outside Vancouver, that has a history of supporting, well, actually a long history of supporting and educating people in wood firing. They have a long line of international wood fires that they have brought to fire the various kilns they've had over the years. Makers such as Jack Troy, Simon Levin, Ted Neal, Martin Tagseth, Robert Barron, just to name a few. Detail shot there. This train is built by American wood fire and kiln builder Ted Neal. I had the privilege of firing this kiln. It fires beautifully. There's a core group of people from the community that do a couple firings a year, and the kilns are used for educational purposes as well, classes and workshops, etc. I believe you can also rent the kilns out for firing. Some of the core folks in the group that I was in touch with for leading up to the talk were Linda Doherty, Cheryl Stapleton, Linda Ward, Freddie Ron, and Jay McClellan. Okay, so jumping over to the next province, going east now, we've got Alberta. I guess where to start at. This is the Banff Center, and for me, the Banff Center has had huge ripples in particularly Alberta, but also the West Coast. It seemed like it all began in 1976 with John Chalk leading a small group building a two-chamber climbing kiln. You can see it here in the setting that they built this in. Another one of the Rocky Mountains. A young Linda Christensen was a work study at the time at the Banff Center and helped with the kiln building. Many of you will know Linda as the Minnesota wood fire legend she is. Linda was brought back to Banff in the mid-80s to construct this kiln, which still gets fired today. You can kind of see in this photo the background. It's a little blurry because it's obviously an old photo, but you can see the township. The kiln stands within a easy walking distance down the mountain to the town. On Tunnel Mountain is where the art center is, Banff Center for the Arts. So Dan Murphy and I facilitated an atmospheric residency at the Banff Center in 2015 with an amazing group of folks, many of whom are still wood firing today. Grace Boyd, Natasha Alphonse, Katie Dryber, Maggie Boyd, and Adam Bernath are pictured in this photo here. Some of the others in the residency were Terry Hildebrand, Dylan McHugh, Cam Fisher, Adam Lefebvre, and the list goes on. You can get a better idea of the actual whole kiln there and kind of how it sits today. The next year, the center brought back Dan and I to facilitate a group building a train kiln as a complement to Linda's kiln. So here's Dan with Ayla Murray and Grace Boyd figuring out the arch, and then as they place the arch over the throat arch there. Again, it was an amazing group of people still active in the field. Sarah Leckie, Ayla Murray, Hideo Mabuchi, Gordy Inuzuka, to name a few. I can't explain how much learning happens in a scenario. It's so dynamic. We had 15 people and broken into 2 different groups. We basically did shift work on the kiln, and when you weren't making or building the kiln, you were in the studio making. In a month, we built the kiln and fired it twice. The center is well known for artists and residencies, which are amazing, but the kilns and studio space can also be rented. When I was a student doing my BFA, the schools or a couple of the schools I would at or were studying at would take groups of students out to the Banff Center to fire the kilns. And later in my apprenticeships, we fired out in Banff numerous times. Thinking back to this, it was an interesting reflection on how many people I stoked that kiln with and how much I've learned. So thank you, Linda and the Banff Center. There's the train we ended up building in 2016. So 2 of the most active wood fires in and around Calgary during my apprenticeship years were Jim Etzkorn and Bob Reimer. There's a nice wood fire teapot of Jim Etzkorn's. As a young wood firer, I latched onto these 2. I worked for Jim for the good part of 5 years. And Jim's best friend was Bob. This is a nice a picture of Bob's. There were many firings and out in Banff and elsewhere, but Bob eventually ended up building this kiln. I couldn't find an image of the actual kiln, but this is the pretty much, these are the plans in Jack Troy's book that Bob built the kiln by. We fired this thing, or the kiln basically got fired well over 100 times, basically until it was crumbling. So much learning and so many people in the community firing this kiln at North Mount Pleasant Arts Center in Calgary. This was an interesting scenario. The kiln was built and constructed right across from a fire hall. So we would, just about every firing, we would get a visit from the fire department. And my father was actually a lieutenant and a chief around these times of my career. So my dad would kind of catch flack in the fire hall community about what's your kid doing now, sort of thing, the little pyromaniac. One of my favorite firings was with Sarah Pike when she was 8 months pregnant in this kiln. We got the kiln way too hot and things were really drippy, but a little grinding and the pots turned out amazing. So moving north of Calgary now, just north of Calgary in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains is this kiln. This is an image of a kiln, John Chalk and Barb Tipton's 3-chamber climbing kiln in Sundre, Alberta. I used to joke that you could probably see the smoke from the Banff kiln, from this kiln, if they were both firing at the same time. Here's some of the there's the other side of the kiln. Here's some of the work that came out of the kiln. It was, like I said, it was 3 chambers, and the first 2 chambers were fired exclusively, or surfaced, I should say, exclusively with wood. And then the 3rd chamber was soda and wood. Most of these, I think, are out of the 3rd chamber. John was a maverick in the true sense of the word. He did things his own way. And often this is what led to the innovation in ceramic materials that he became known for. Nice cup of Barb Tipton, some pictures of John's. John was important in my development as a wood firer, as he was to many others that came to stoke the kiln. Here we see D. Funk of Regina Beach, Saskatchewan, and Christine Peterson of Calgary, both staples at the firings when I was firing there and part of the wood fire community to date. Oh, there's the back of my head. There's the back of John's head. This kind of gives you an image of, or an idea of the surroundings of where the kiln was in the foothills there. Often fired in the middle of the winter. if anyone's listening, any wood fires down in Florida, I always get comments that these are, they get a good laugh that we fire in the middle of the winter with 3 feet of snow. So jumping around a bit in Alberta here, we've got Medalta in the city of Medicine Hat, down south in Alberta. The Medalta Artist or International Artist in Residency, otherwise known as MARE, one of the few international ceramic residencies in our country. Medalta has a kiln that was built, I believe, in the early 90s, I would guess, and it was built by a fellow named Alan Lakovetsky, a wood firer from Winnipeg, Manitoba area. Kiln has been host to many, many firings over the years and still remains up for one for rent or use while a resident. So this is Sam Ulick. We're jumping around a bit in Alberta, but now we're north of, we're up by Edmonton. And Sam, pretty much a stone throw away from John Chalk's kiln. I believe Sam started at NASCAD before moving on to an apprenticeship with Bernard, or not Bernard, I believe he apprenticed with Michael Cardew. I'm not exactly sure on those details, but he makes beautiful pots very much in those traditions. You can kind of see some of the ones that come out here. He fires for about 20 hours and a kiln of that size firing in 20 hours is quite a feat. He's designed a really efficient kiln. So over to Red Deer now, basically halfway between John's property and Sam's property is Red Deer College, now known as Red Deer Polytech. And they have a 2-year program with 2 different wood kilns. An interesting option for a person in the right place in their education. It's a 2-year diploma. A small train built by Robert Sanderson and Cole Mignot that I don't have pictures of, but it shares a chimney with this kiln, which was built by Bob Reimer, and is the same design as the drawings that I showed earlier. The Peggy Udall drawings out of Jack Troy's book. So moving over east to the next province, we have Saskatchewan, moving on to the University of Regina. This kiln was one that Martin built at the University, or Martin Tagseth, sorry, built at the University of Regina last year. They have 2 kilns that are available for their students during their BFA or MFA, but the kilns are also utilized for community education with shorter courses running outside the regular school year. In fact, they have a month-long course this spring that looks amazing, making and firing wood fire pots with Martin Tagseth. So Martin built both these kilns with, I believe they were workshops, both of them. I don't have pictures of the second kiln, which is a small train. Both kilns that are really suitably sized for the programs, for student kilns and the academic schedule. So Martin has built a number of other kilns in the province, and it has a hand in educating some of the wood fires we know of. Here's his first kiln he built at his studio in Lake Lenoir, Saskatchewan. This was a 100 cubic foot onagama. Unfortunately, this kiln, I believe there was a sinkhole that kind of opened up during the firing off of the kiln. So like cone 12, and all of a sudden the arch started shifting. It was kind of a crazy story when Martin was telling me about that one. Here's what he replaced it with. An onagama almost double the size. Here's some of the pots that looks like it was the second firing in that kiln. This is a kiln Martin built in Carmel, Saskatchewan with a couple other potters, Jeff Stewart and Mel Bolin, and apprentice Bobby. I don't know Bobby's last name. Sorry about that, Bobby. Bobby makes pots in Winnipeg, Manitoba right now. And then Martin needed a quicker turnaround. So he built this at his studio. It kind of sits out back of the studio behind the onagama, so to speak. And it's a little bury box, little quicker fire. And there she is all done. Martin's my co-faculty here at Kootenay Studio Arts, and so I wrangled a bunch of images out of him. Martin was also another one when I interviewed people that came up as kind of one of the more known or favorite wood firers kind of across the country. So I thought I'd show a bunch of his work here. This is what he calls a frolicking basket. Beautiful vase. Okay, now into Manitoba, we've got this covered jar of Bob Archambault. Historically speaking, this place definitely has ripples reverberating from it. Starting with Bob Archambault, who some would think of as the grandfather of Canadian wood firing. Although ironically, Bob fires most of his work south of the border. Bob would haul the bulk of his work down to his good friend, Dan Anderson. Dan has a Onagama in Illinois. The remainder of his work would get fired in numerous kilns around Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Bob is faculty emeritus at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg and makes his pots there. When I was teaching there, I loved how he would just meander into class and just tell these epic tales of the old days. We've got Chris Pankow, the technician at University of Manitoba and grad of their program. He went on to University of Minnesota to finish his grad work. He was part of many firings when I was at the University of Manitoba, as was Steve Grimmer, my co-faculty, but I didn't get images of Steve's, unfortunately. So there was a pretty big shift in the 90s at the University of Manitoba when Catherine Finnerty took over. She brought in Winnipeg-raised Will Shinkarik, who was a recent grad of the Utah State, the home of the train kiln. And he built a beautiful train, this kiln seen here. A year later, she left and handed the reins to Martin Tagseth, who fired that kiln with students what seemed like nonstop. I believe I was at ACAD at this time, and there was a lot of kind of ripples or noise that we could hear in Alberta from this gang. Around the same time, Tom Rohr arrived in Winnipeg and built this 2-chamber kiln just outside of the city at St. Agath, a small little town outside of Winnipeg, at Remo Mamrel's place. He built this with Remo, I should say. The kiln had a relatively short life, but contributed to the education of many. The pots I saw out of this kiln were gorgeous. People like Mike Astle, Chris Pankow, Garnet McCullough, Candace Ring all cut their teeth on these kilns. Tom was particularly important in my education because the year before he had moved to Winnipeg, he was in Calgary as a visiting artist at ACAD. This is where we met, and this is where Tom introduced me to wood firing. Tom was a huge personality and a great communicator in this, and made him an amazing teacher. Although in Canada for only 5 years or less, he inspired many to carry the torch, and some of these people are now educating the next generation. I taught at U of M over a decade later, and his presence could still be felt. When Martin left the U of M, Steve Grimmer was hired and was competent with wood firing, got some great results out of the kiln. I think it was 2014 when I was there, and Steve, Chris, and I, these are some firings that we did together of that train kiln. So shortly after I left, they tore down the train and replaced it with this guy here. So this is exactly where those images of the train were. This is a 20 cubic foot kiln that's designed for a relatively quick firing. I think it was 12 to 20 hour sort of thing, and designed for flashing and not a lot of ash. Some of the other notables there's the chamber. Some of the other notables around the Winnipeg area are Jen Sonnenberg, Alan Lakovetsky, and Mike Astle. Mike Astle, here's his kiln here. Here it is firing at night. Here's some pots of Mike's. So moving on to Ontario. Sheridan over the years has played a huge role in spreading some wood fire love through our country, starting way back with Ruth Gowdy McKinley. Both Tony Clennell and Bruce Cochran attributed their beginnings as wood fires to Ruth. Ruth had a residence and wood kiln that sounds like it was right there on campus. And she would employ the eager students to fire the kilns. Her name came up in many of the interviews that I conducted for the talk here. Just a couple more of her pieces. Here's the current kiln at Sheridan, as far as I could find out. Tony Clennell has a 40-year history of firing wood kilns in Ontario. I think he said something like, he's the granddaddy or something like that. Tony, are you out there? He started out, as many of us did in the old days, with an Olson fast fire and grew out of it quickly, which led to building this kiln with Linda Christensen, Minnesota wood fire, Linda Christensen and Gail Fairchild. Tony fires a kiln in Pinecroft. This is the only image he sent me of the kiln, unfortunately. So Tony fires, I think he has this 45 firings in this kiln already, and it seems like he just built it not that long ago. Tony's obviously a fairly prolific maker. And Tony mentioned something interesting in our conversation that I thought was awesome, that the wood fire scene in Ontario is largely driven by women. Some of the movers and shakers he mentioned are Monica Johnson, Terry Osborne, Kim Harcourt, and Emma Smith, who I'll talk about in a second, and Heather Smith. Heather fires with one of the more known wood fires in the country, Bruce Cochran. As I mentioned, Bruce's roots also go back to Ruth Gowdy. Bruce cut his teeth firing with Ruth in the 70s. He ended up running the program at Sheridan for a long period, at which point he was firing mostly soda. Upon retiring, he built this kiln and has been developing a very sensitive understanding how to surface his work successfully with it. I believe Bruce is a master of the surface form relationship inherent to ceramics. You can kind of see that on some of this work here. Okay, thanks. Some of Bruce's work. Nice chunky plate. So Bruce's right-hand woman with this kiln is Heather Smith. Heather is a hand builder extraordinaire. I believe Heather has played a part of every firing of this kiln, and they've had a few, it sounds like. So these are some of Heather's pots out of the kiln. Beautiful little flask. Okay, on to Emma Smith. She's a young wood fire who seems to be moving and shaking. She's on her second kiln and has a little gallery and shop. Everyone I talked to about Emma said the same thing. Watch out for this one. Here's some of her work. This little vase, subtle color, the vase. Some of the other people mentioned when talking about Ontario were Lisa Skog, Mike Doxey, Chris Lass. Actually, there's just way too many to list off. If there was a prize for the most wood fires in a province, Ontario would win. Oh, there's the pot. Where's Waldo? So on to Quebec now. Daniel Gringas. a wood fire potter. Numerous people mentioned when asking about what was going on in Quebec in terms of wood firing. Daniel built a new kiln over COVID. This was the only image I got, but there's great images of the new kiln and the kiln build on Instagram. Kind of a little envious on this kiln shed. And then we've got Yannick Potman. Nick is a multimedia artist with a broad range of output from performance to pottery. Yannick was a really interesting one. He fires his kiln at various temperatures. So he'll fire everywhere from 04 to cone 10, depending what he wants out of it. Most of it is sculpture going into the kiln. In saying that, this is his old kiln, which I don't believe exists anymore. Here's the new kiln that he's firing. A couple different shots of it. Most of the pots he said that he makes just go into his own kitchen or to locals or friends or things like that. There's a shot from the build. And out to the Maritimes, Michael Flaherty is a potter at Port Union, Newfoundland. Michael built this kiln in 2015. It's an 8 cubic foot train and the only kiln, as far as he knows, or the only wood kiln that he knows of in Newfoundland. Michael feels pretty strongly connected to the outdoors. Processing wood, he takes it a step further in collecting seaweed, flowers, and plants that he lays on his pots during the load. You can kind of see some of that going on here. He fires roughly between 20 and 30 hours, depending on the results he's after. He mentioned that he was introduced to wood firing through NASCAD. NASCAD was one of those places that I could not find. I actually put a little bit of effort into digging for the images off of NASCAD or from NASCAD and couldn't find them. So if any of you out there have any of those images of the kilns from NASCAD, I don't believe they exist anymore, but there must be some images out there somewhere. I've seen some great ones of the kiln that they would fire offsite. And I know people like Martin Tagseth and Michael Flaherty and a number of other people have wood fired out there. Sam Ulick was another one of them. So here's a mug from, I believe you could see that mug actually in that last image. There's one of his teapots. And yeah, so in conclusion, it seems to me that wood firing is more popular than ever. Than it's ever been. There are more wood kilns on the continent than ever before, and there's more innovation happening than ever before. Innovation such as the train kilns are making aesthetics more accessible than they ever have been. As a wood firer of 25 years, I'm excited to see surfaces that I've never seen before, almost on a regular basis. This inventory of wood fires is really a work in progress. So please contribute. I'm going to keep the work or keep working on it. And I know Make and Do are keen to add the database to their website. So yeah, join in. I know I've missed numerous people. I think Eden was saying that there was some people chiming in on the chat that there was kilns, and really I poured a lot of time into this and just couldn't include everyone. And I think I'm even over time. How's my time doing? Am I okay for time? I do have a few more images. Here's my wood firing when I had COVID. Here's some of the pots that came out of it. That was meant to wake everyone up. Did everyone? Yeah, a little footstool. One of the bowls that came out of it, reduction cooled. I just thought I'd throw some of my own pots here at the end to kind of as the finale. This was kind of a special pot. So this, you know, you have a good friend when you leave a platter at his house and he gives it back to you looking like this. So this was a bisque platter that I left at Martin Tagseth's house, and he fired this thing and sent it back to me. It's pretty special. And that was meant to represent wood firing in Canada with all of our snow. And I think that's about it. Any questions? how do we do this? Maybe Deborah, can you, or, oh yeah, okay. Okay, so if there's any questions, you guys can put them in the chat. Otherwise, maybe I could just keep showing different image. No, if I keep showing images, there's going to be repetition here. Oh yeah.
Tell us about wood sources.
Oh yeah, wood sources. So that's a good question. I said that I came to wood firing almost immediately. Like I was probably 20 years old when I was at ACAD, and that was a bit of a gift because I did my second year at KSA, and knowing that I wanted to wood fire, when I went to KSA, it was really apparent that wood was a resource here that was different than it was in 99.9% of the other or anywhere else in the world. And basically wood is in so much abundance here that people just burn it. So up until 2 years ago, I didn't even pay for my wood. I would just go to the sawmill and they would load me with a front end loader, fill my trailer up, and I'd drive away and they'd thank me for not having to burn it. And recently someone's made a business out of that, but I can still get about 2.5 cords of wood for $100. I'd like to say at this point though, I've had a number of conversations about the sustainability issues with wood firing. And I'd just like to point out that all of the wood that I use is going to be burned anyway, or yeah, mostly just burned. It's a byproduct of industry here. So I feel like I'm kind of making beautiful objects out of something that would create carbon anyway. So I could elaborate even further. I've got a couple friends with mobile sawmills that they haul these around, make little piles of wood, and I go collect them. Or there's like the medium-sized sawmills that haven't bought the chipping yet. So then in terms of species, right now I'm running a lot of poplar in my firings. I find actually this pot that's up on the screen right now is a decent example of it. The sort of blue-gray at the bottom, you can see the ash is almost white to blue-gray. Running the poplar, if you do a firing, like when I was firing with John Chalk, he would fire almost exclusively with poplar. And if you remember the pots of his that I showed, there was a lot of grays. And poplar will, because of the amount of potassium, will pull the whole palette of ash towards the gray spectrum. So by combining it with different woods like pine, fir, and larch, even cedar, we kind of get this white to kind of aquamarine in some examples.
Can you talk about how you prepare the wood for sizing?
So Eden's, if this is a bit confusing to people, I have Eden here just kind of telling me the question. So she's asked, what did you ask?
So you have to prepare the wood size
Oh.
wise.
That's a good question too. So do I prepare the wood size wise? So that's one of the beauties of a train kiln, in that the bury box is designed to take massive stumps that don't have to be split, and they'll chew through all sorts of sizes of wood. Most other kilns I fire will only take like a diameter, maybe 6x6 diameter sort of thing. So basically the process goes, I go to the mill, I get loaded up on my trailer, and then I cut it to length, and the length is really the only thing that's important. We cut about 20 inches or maybe 16 to 20 inches for the onagama, and then 36 inches for the train. But I have like a crisscross of grates in the train, the hobs, so that I don't have to worry about like super specific. That's actually one of my pet peeves, is like having to deal with like super specific wood and it's falling down in the embers anyways.
What is the smallest kiln one can build with decent quantity of pots?
Oh, so someone's asking about what is the smallest
Kiln
kiln to build with a decent quantity of pots? This is a really interesting question in terms of, it's almost like a very personalized question. And when I was in Australia, I fired with a fellow named Robert Barron who had 1,000 cubic foot kiln, and he would only fire it like twice a year, and he would fire for 100 hours. That thing is like 5 times the size of my Onagama, and we fire for 100 hours. So it's kind of a hard question to answer, because it comes into the question of like what kind of work you're making. How often do you want to fire? Do you provide your living from making the work? Do you, I don't know, that's a tough one to answer, but I could generalize and say that plan in Jack Troy's book is one of the designs that I champion over most other kilns, because it's a moderate size, which is about 20 cubic foot, and it fires in like 10 to 12 hours with a cord of wood, and there's quite a bit of evidence of the wood fire process in that amount of time, because the firebox is right in the chamber. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, some of these, that's a question that maybe we could continue on like an email or something like that. Some other, I feel like I could go on and on about that one. Is that the end of the questions?
The Jack Troy book.
Oh, yeah.
Kiln book.
Yeah, so
Called the
Jack,
kiln book.
no, it's not called the kiln book. The Jack Troy book is called, it's actually right there, Eden, if you want to grab it, but it's called Wood Fired Stoneware and Porcelain. Here, I'll just show you it. So we have the image here. This was amazing. This was put out in the year, like, thank you, Jack, for writing that. This was put out when I started wood firing, and I found it to be a really good read as someone who was just introduced to wood firing, but also it's kept me interested as like throughout the 20-25 years.
Where's your favorite place to fire?
Where is my favorite place to fire?
Hi from the Delta.
Hi from a Delta. Oh, that's a tough one. Is that like where's my favorite kiln to fire, or where my favorite people are to fire, or with, or there's a pretty magic group out at the Shadbolt. Like, those people are great people. Yeah, that's a good one at home. Maybe it is. Yeah, we have a pretty special crew here. We have an amazing group of people that are interested in wood firing. Our crew, I should mention, is usually whoever I have as an assistant, my wife, and Cam Stewart, whose kiln I showed earlier. And then the rest of them aren't potters. Like, there's a timber framer and a school teacher and a tree planter, and they're just like fellow pyromaniacs, you could say. And just really sensitive people, I think is kind of the common thread through the people who I fire with. I think, yeah, humility and people who, yeah, good listeners, I guess.
Do you have any thoughts on the increasing popularity of wood firing?
Any thoughts on the increase in popularity of wood firing?
Why and how this may impact the field?
I think it's all positive. I think that I think it's like one of the most exciting times ever to be a wood firer. Like, I think back to the historical pots that I look at, and how much anguish they had to go through to fire those pots, not having chainsaws and not having like trucks and trailers or whatever they needed to transport the wood. And now we have all of these resources, and the more people that become interested in it, the more we can progress this. I mean, like I said in the talk, like, there's more people doing it, which is resulting in innovation. There's exciting things happening Hideo Mabuchi, who I mentioned, I met him through one of those residencies in Banff, and he runs a physics lab in Stanford or at Stanford, and is using $1 million microscopes and mass spectrometers to drill into wood fire pots and get to kind of the science end of things on, which is helping us innovate. Like I said, the surfaces, like Instagram is just blows my mind. Like there's a number of wood fires I could mention internationally that are posting images of things that just kind of I'm taken back and often curious. For a while there, I thought it was only me that was like, this surface surely has never been made by humankind. And talking to some of my colleagues, there's definitely surfaces out there that are being innovated now that aren't. I mentioned the train too. I don't know, popularity. I kind of feel like I came to wood firing as a bit as an anti-establishment. Like it appealed to me a lot that it wasn't popular. It was on the margins of society. It was kind of a crazy thing to do. And now as an educator, I kind of kind of proliferated as much as I can. I don't know. Next question, please.
Pia says that they just fired their train with 5 women. And Jeff says, if anyone is in the Comox Valley, the weekend of April 30th, Ford, Hutchins, and again on Daniel Island is firing for the first time in 2 years.
So are you guys all able to see that, the whatever you're reading from? The chat?
Yes.
There was a few good comments there that Pia said that she's firing, or she just fired with 5 women. Maybe something to like just like comment on is like I love the it kind of drives me a bit nuts, the whole gender thing when it comes up, because I feel like we here and most wood fires that I know almost don't have a luxury of, and I don't know why they would want to like discriminate against whatever gender. I think that this is hard work and it's sensitive work, and you find the right character or integrity in a human being, and I don't know, gender is a tough one, I think, so, but I am aware that some people have been discriminated against for their gender, and I try to kind of, I guess, write that. So I'm stoked to hear that, like, the Pia, you got 5 women on your crew. I think our crew is roughly about half, but there's firings where we have probably 80% women.
Emma Smith wants to know if you can talk about the cost of firing financially.
Oh my God. There's no way around how ridiculous wood firing is. Like it's a cruel muse. I think that we wood firers have an abnormal propensity for failure. I think we're almost addicted to that mystery, and along with that mystery comes failure. The cost is really hard to equate. I think that there's some firings where I'm definitely more conservative in my decision making, because I need pots for a show or pots to come out or something, and I really try to revel in that experimental and taking risk when I have firings that aren't part of, I don't know, all the pots aren't slotted for something. The cost, I don't even know how to answer that question, because I just think it's ridiculous. I think that I marvel at the fact I've been able to do this for years, and it's broken me at times. I feel like, I mean, my doctor said, like, you got to stop, like, not stop wood firing, but you got to slow down at certain times of my life, because of, and that's largely, I think, because of wood firing, like hauling brick, salvaging brick, the wood. So,
Mona says, is there a platform for Canadian wood fires to connect?
sorry, I'm just reflecting back on Emma's question. I think it's a really good one because it's, yeah, I like that question. We should almost, Emma, let's have a panel on that one when we get together for a symposium or something. So what was that one?
Is there a platform for Canadian wood fires to connect?
A platform for Canadian wood fires. There isn't yet, but I think like at its root, that's what this was about, was my effort to kind of start the ball rolling on, well, just connecting.
Charlotte says there's other kilns in Manitoba, Kirk Creed and New Brunswick, Lee, Horace Clark, and Meacham.
Thank you, Charlotte. You should, Charlotte, can you please either submit your own for sure, to the call out. We just need images and
Says he has bricks available in Saskatchewan and kilns to dismantle.
Yes, I will. I will send you. I missed the previous call. I assume, because I built 2 kilns, Anagama, and a lot of people learn in my kilns. Plus, I did a survey of Saskatchewan Plain and an exhibition of old pots from the pioneers that they were all wood firing. I mean, most of them don't exist anymore, but my kiln are still standing. One is kind of needed of dismantling, and I've not fired them. And I wanted to mention also Jeff Stewart, who is in the same community, who built a kiln with Martin in Carmel, and I think Robin mentioned it. And I fired with Robin in Banff a long time ago, and I saw a picture of myself, but that dates myself. So anyway, if anybody wants some bricks too, come to Meacham, Saskatchewan, and pick them up. Okay, bye.
thanks, Charlotte.
Thank you for the great talk and the great survey. Incomplete, but great. And good luck, Robin.
Work in progress. Thank you, Charlotte.
You can turn your screen on.
So,
Did I unshare yet?
so do we have any more questions?
Yes, yes, I have a question.
Excellent.
Maybe I'll just say it rather than type it.
Yeah.
Robin, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the specific aesthetic that attracts you to the wood-fired pots, because you would say these are gorgeous, or maybe these weren't so good. And as a not a wood fire, I mean, I can look at a pot and say, oh, I really like that pot, but I'm wondering what it is specifically that you look for in terms of aesthetics in a wood-fired pot that makes you say, that's a great pot.
Such a good question, Amy. Yeah, that's a really good question, I think, because of the beauty in the eye of the beholder thing, but also just an inclusivity thing. Like I mentioned Cam Stewart, and Cam Stewart and I have fired together for probably close to 20 years, and we're looking for very different things. I appreciate his aesthetic, as I appreciate, like I mentioned, Bruce Cochran is one of my wood fire heroes. But I have to say, like, both of those people fire for a completely different aesthetic than what I'm looking for. Right. I go through ebbs and flows, and with certain aesthetics, for sure, I fire fire porcelain as well as reduction cool. But my kilns yield quite a broad spectrum of surfaces throughout the kiln. And so there's a couple different aesthetics. I guess I could just generalize and say, like, I don't use a lot of applied glaze. I recently have found some rock here that's almost pure feldspar that I'm playing with now, and that might end up with me using a lot more glaze. But really what I've been kind of obsessed with from the beginning is surfacing it with the ash. Traditionally speaking, like the way glaze is applied is through dipping, pouring, and spraying and painting. And I'm interested in using the flame to distribute the glaze. So the jar that we're looking at, am I still sharing my screen?
Yeah.
Is like that, to get the amount of glass and the minerals in the wood to form that, or that form that glaze, to create that amount of glass, I'm actually stoking on top of this piece for probably 25 to 30 hours, and going through cycles of building up the ash and then melting it down on top of it. So that's one thing I'm really interested in, is playing with a lot of glaze, like coating the pieces almost with glaze or the wood ash. If I had to fully generalize or have a statement that encompassed all the things I really like, maybe, or the overarching sort of philosophy, I would say, like, I'm looking for something I've never seen before, I guess you could say. I think that's what excites me the most. That almost goes back to like my early years with John Chalk, where him and I would have great conversations about that specifically, like firing a kiln and making decisions based on learning something, and trying to get something you've never seen before. I think that wood kilns inherently sort of have that nature because you can't control all the variables. There's always like that weird little spot. Like in my onigama, I have this weird little spot actually and it's not the front row of pots in the firebox, but it's the pots that are tucked behind them and they turn pink. Like until I saw that, I'd never seen pink out of an onigama unless it was an applied glaze or like a copper fuming or something. So things like that.
Thanks,
Yeah.
that's great. No, I was just curious.
So any more questions for Robin? Well, if not, it is, we've gone a long time. We had 91 people listening to you, Robin, during the course of this. And it was a terrific presentation. It's so interesting to see, to gather that information Canada-wide, like what's happening. And, you know, when you make a ground level bunch of information like that, it'll only grow and you'll be able to watch this trend now. I mean, this has been a growing trend for such a long time. And adds to Canadian ceramic history.
Did we lose it?
So thank you. Thank you so very
Can you guys
much.
hear me?
So,
Deborah. Well, it looks like it was the closing.
so any last comments, Robin, before we shut this down? Oh, are you guys able to hear me? Maybe not.
Oh, yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So Robin, did you have anything else you wanted to say? Well, I think Robin might be frozen.
I think you're definitely right.
Robin, where'd you go? Well, we'll wait a couple of minutes and then if he can't unfreeze, then we will just conclude. And it was wonderful that so many of you turned up. And we will put this up on our YouTube, on our website, and we will send out a notice when it has been put up on the website.
Great.
We have 2 other talks already there, and we're really, really pleased about this Zoom business of being able to record a talk and then share it with anyone who's remotely interested. And I do think we have lost Robin.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, because he's not even showing up on the screen. Anybody see him? No.
no.
Okay, well, thank you again, everyone. And we will send please sign up for our email so we can send you notices of our next Zoom talk or our next in-person speaker. Our next in-person speaker will be Russell Hackney on June 12th. and it will be held at the Shadbolt Center for the Arts. That's an in-person. We will do some recording, so we might be able to share some of that. So thank you all so very much, and nice to see you all. So I'll end the meeting.
Bye, Deborah.
Bye-bye. Oh dear. I missed that, Amy.